Have you ever looked in the mirror and just wondered, where did I get that from? Your eyes, your smile, maybe that weird way you laugh. It's all part of a genetic story that was written long before you were even here. So today, we're going to break down the rules of that story, the science of inheritance. Let's unravel the code that makes you, well, you.
It's a great question, right? You might have your dad's smile or your mom's eyes, but you are definitely not just a simple carbon copy of either of them. So how in the world does that work? How does nature manage to create both similarity and difference all in one go?
Well, the answer is in this really cool two-part process. On one hand, inheritance hands us a basic blueprint, right? A common body design from our parents. That's why we see those family traits. But on the other hand, the very act of reproduction introduces these small, unique variations. It's this perfect balance between the two that makes life so incredibly diverse.
Okay, so let's start with what we can actually see, that family resemblance. Think about something super simple, like your earlobes. Are they attached to the side of your head, or do they hang free? Believe it or not, this is a simple inherited trait, just one of countless things passed down through generations. Now, this whole process isn't random at all. There is a set of rules, like a biological instruction manual, that decides how these traits get passed on from parent to child. And this entire system, this amazing rule book, is called Heredity. For centuries, though, these rules were a total mystery. Nobody could figure it out. That is, until one man started looking for clues in a pretty unexpected place, a monastery garden.
Yup, meet Gregor Mendel. Back in the 19th century, this Austrian monk used his knowledge of science and mathematics to tackle the puzzle of heredity, and his tool of choice? The humble garden pea. See, what made him so revolutionary wasn't just that he was observing things. He was the first person to actually meticulously count the results. And it turns out, applying math to biology was the key to unlocking everything. So how'd he do it? Let's walk through his brilliant experiment. He started with one super clear trait, plant height. First, for what he called the P, or parental generation, he crossed a purebred tall plant with a purebred short plant. Simple enough. Then he planted those seeds to grow the first new generation, which he called F1. Finally, he just let those F1 plants self-pollinate to create the second generation, F2. Just a simple, elegant three-step process.
And this is where it gets weird. The result was a complete surprise. You might have expected a mix, right? Maybe some medium-height plants. Nope. Every single plant in that first F1 generation was tall. It was as if the shortness trait had just vanished. Poof, gone. So, where did it go?
This totally unexpected result is what led Mendel to discover the fundamental rules of inheritance. The principles that explain not just how traits show up, but how they can be hidden in plain sight.
The big question is, what happens next? If all these F1 plants are tall, what kind of offspring are they going to produce? Did that shortness trait really disappear forever, or was it just hiding?
It came back. In the F2 generation, the short plants reappeared. And not just randomly, they showed up in this predictable, consistent mathematical ratio. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 short plant. A 3-to-1 ratio. This was the golden clue that unlocked the whole mystery.
This discovery led Mendel to his first big idea. He called traits like tallness dominant. This just means you only need 1 copy of the instructional factor for that trait to show up. So, a plant that gets a tall factor and a short factor will still be tall because tallness dominates. It's the louder voice in the room.
And what about that hidden shortness trait? He called that recessive. A recessive trait only makes an appearance if an individual inherits two copies of that factor, one from each parent. It can be carried silently for a generation, only to pop up later. This perfectly explains how shortness was hidden in those F1 plants but came back in the F2.
But Mendel didn't stop there. He got even more ambitious. He started wondering, are traits inherited as a package deal? Like, if a pea is round, does that mean it's always yellow? To find out, he set up an experiment to track two traits at the same time: seed shape, round or wrinkled, and seed color, yellow or green. Okay, this chart might look a little intense, but it's actually pretty simple. It's called a Punnett square, and it just helps us see all the possible genetic combinations. So across the top, you have the possible trait combos from one parent, and down the side, the combos from the other. When you fill in the grid, you see every possible outcome for their offspring. And here's the key: you start to see new combinations, ones that the parents didn't even have.
And this is what he found. Another incredibly consistent, predictable ratio, 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. Sure, he got the original combinations, round and yellow, wrinkled and green. But he also got brand new ones, round and green, and wrinkled and yellow. This was huge. It proved that the trait for seed shape is inherited completely independently from the trait for seed color. They aren't linked at all.
Mendel's discovery was absolutely groundbreaking. He proved inheritance followed these mathematical rules, and he called the units of inheritance factors. But he had no idea what they actually were. It's like he wrote the rules to a game without ever knowing what the pieces were made of. It would take almost 100 years for science to finally find them.
And that leads to the next massive question that drove biology forward for decades. What are these mysterious factors? What is the physical stuff that carries information from one generation to the next?
The answer, of course, is the gene. A gene is just a specific section of our DNA. You can think of it like a single recipe in a gigantic cookbook. And that recipe gives the instructions for making one specific protein. And it's these proteins that do all the work, building the things that control our traits, everything from a pea plant's height to the color of your eyes. These are Mendel's factors.
And these genes aren't just floating around loose. They're neatly packaged into structures called chromosomes. Each chromosome is a long piece of DNA packed with hundreds or thousands of genes. And here's the most important part. In organisms like us, we have two copies of each chromosome in pretty much every cell, one that we inherited from our mother and one from our father.
All right, so we've covered the history and the biology. Now let's bring it all home and see these rules play out in a perfect, everyday human example. How we determine if a baby is a boy or a girl.
So most of our chromosomes come in 22 matching pairs, but it's the 23rd pair that determines biological sex. Women have a matching pair of two X chromosomes. Men have a mismatched pair, one X and one, smaller, Y chromosome. Now, if you look at this table, a mother has two X chromosomes, right? So she can only ever pass on an X to her child. That's all she's got to give.
And this really shows the deciding factor. Since the mother always contributes an X, the sex of the child comes down entirely to which chromosome the father contributes. If the sperm that fertilizes the egg is carrying an X, the child will be XX, a girl. If it's carrying a Y, the child will be XY, a boy. It's basically a 50-50 chance, decided in that single instant.
So we've seen how inheritance follows these beautiful, predictable rules, first uncovered in a garden over 150 years ago. But that brings us right back to our very first question. When you think about the trillions upon trillions of possible combinations of genes from just two parents, the real miracle isn't just that these rules exist. It's that they produce the one-of-a-kind, never-before-seen combination that is uniquely you.